Hey friends, and welcome back to another true crime case. Today we're going to be discussing the disappearance of Brian Shaffer. Now, I remember this story pretty well. It came out around the time I was either like in high school or college, somewhere around the early to mid 2000s. It was like all over the news. So this was one of those cases that I always wondered what happened. So here we are. Basically, Brian was the definition of everything going well for him. You know, he was on his way to med school. He had a girlfriend and life was just really good. And then unfortunately, something tragic happened to him. And a lot of people close to him state that this incident affected him mentally and they believe that he purposely disappeared. But others believe because of the people he surrounded himself around that something more sinister happened. So I'm going to share the details of what we have gathered for today's case. And you guys can decide down in the comments what you believe happened. So let's get into the disappearance of Brian Shaffer. So Brian Shaffer was born on February 25th, 1979, and he was a medical student at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. On the night of March 31st, 2006, Brian went out with some friends to celebrate the beginning of spring break. Later on that evening, he had separated from his friends and they assumed that he had gone home without telling them. However, there was a security camera near the entrance of a Columbus bar that briefly caught Brian socializing with two women around 2 a.m. on April 1st. And then after talking to these two women, Brian was seen re-entering the bar that he was last seen at, but he was never seen leaving the bar. And unfortunately, that would be the last time that anyone had seen Brian alive. And as soon as this case broke out, like I said earlier, it was all over the news. It was national headlines. It was almost like you couldn't turn the TV on without hearing about this case, much like the Natalie Holloways, the JonBenet Ramseys. Now, Brian's disappearance was especially puzzling to police because at the time of his disappearance, the bar only had one exit and entrance that the public had access to. Now, Columbus PD have several theories about what happened to Brian. Some of them believe that his friend Clint, the one that went out with him the night that Brian went missing, who also refused to take a polygraph test, was involved in his disappearance. Some people believe that foul play was involved and that Brian may have been a victim of the smiley face killer. And then other people believe that Brian is somewhere alive and well, living under a new identity. So Brian grew up on the outskirts of Columbus in a small town called Pickerington in Ohio. He's also the oldest of two sons to Renee and Randy Shaffer. He graduated from high school in 1997 and then went on to OSU, Ohio State University, to continue his undergrad. And 6 years later, he graduated with a degree in microbiology. Following that, Brian went on to OSU College of Medicine in 2004. So things were going pretty well. He was on track to graduate, get a great paying job. Life was good all the way up until tragedy struck in 2006. So now we're winding down to the last moments of Brian's life. So in that same year, in March, Brian's mother passed away from a rare genetic disease called myelodysplasia, which affects the growth of the skeleton and the reproductive system. Now, even though on the outside, Brian appeared to be handling the death of his mother pretty well, his friends stated that he was having a very difficult time dealing with the stress. But eventually he would push through and he would continue his schooling. And during his time in school is also when he became romantically involved with another medical student by the name of Alexis Wagner. So Alexis, as well as some of her family and friends, believed that Brian was going to propose to her sometime during the year of 2006. More specifically, they believed that the event would take place during their trip to Miami that they had planned for spring break at the beginning of April. Now that would make perfect sense because Brian was in love with tropical places. He fancied Miami and places like Miami because they just seemed very relaxed. and very much the opposite of his life in Columbus, Ohio. So it would make sense for him to propose to her during a memorable trip like Miami for them. Now, interestingly enough, even though Brian pursued a career in the medical field, he told his friends that his real passion was to play in a band. It just seemed like Brian had this carefree spirit that he wanted to let out, but his reality forced him to suppress it. And it just seemed like things were stacking up on top of him. So as you could imagine, Brian is probably stressed beyond belief. He's already dealing with medical school, which is no walk in the park. Then he has his girlfriend who's probably expecting him to ask for her hand in marriage if he's not oblivious to that. And then, of course, his mother passing away. And these are all three things that are happening at the same time. So I could see why people believe that he probably just couldn't handle life anymore and decided to take off. So now let's get into the events of what happened specifically on the night of his disappearance. So on Friday, March 31st, 2006, classes had ended for Brian and spring break was due to start the following week. To celebrate, him and his father, Randy, decided to go out for a steak dinner. Now, his father, Randy, noted that Brian seemed a bit agitated, just stressed, tired, because he had been cramming for his exams that were coming up. And then furthermore, he knew that Brian had plans to go out with his friend Clint, but his father had reservations about it, but chose not to say anything because he didn't want to ruin the moment. And, he knew it was the weekend leading to spring break, so he didn't want to be that Debbie Downer, and he just kept his feelings to himself. So later on that night at around 9 p.m., Brian met up with his best friend, William Florence, aka Clint, at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, which is a bar. Now, it's unclear if they started drinking at this point or if they were waiting for someone or something, but an hour later, Brian decides to call his girlfriend, Alexis, who had gone to Toledo to visit her family before she was scheduled to go to Miami with Brian the following week for spring break. So after Brian gets off the phone call with Alexis, Clint and Brian would start bar hopping. So at each bar, the both of them would have a shot of some kind of hard liquor, and they would continue doing so until they made their way down to an area known as Area District. And at this point, this is where a girl named Meredith, who is a friend of Clint's, joins the duo. So now the three of them are down at Arena District, and Meredith gives them a ride back to the original bar that they started at, which was the Ugly Tuna Saloona, and there is where they all have a shot together. So after they all have a shot, at some point Brian excuses himself. Some time had passed by. Clint and Meredith started wondering where Brian went, so they started looking around the bar for him, trying to call his phone at the same time, but he wasn't answering. So at this point, the bar is now getting ready to close because it's 2 a.m. So you gotta cut it off. So they start making their way outside, and they figured they will either bump into him outside or they will see him exiting from the bar. So they intentionally stand by the entrance/exit in hopes of spotting Brian, and eventually all of the patrons would make their way out, but Brian was not a part of that crowd. So since they didn't see Brian, they assumed that maybe he had gone home and just didn't tell them. So at this point, Alexis and Brian's dad are also trying to get in contact with Brian, but they cannot reach him either. So then on Monday, he has his flight for Miami with Alexis, and he missed his flight. And it was at this point where they decide to report him missing because they know without a doubt he would not miss that trip for the world. So Columbus Police Department decided to begin their search at the last known place that Brian was seen, which was at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. That is such a tongue twister. I could not remember the name. Who has time for that? So the area where Clint and Brian were doing all of their bar hopping was known to have an increasing rate of crime, and so therefore a lot of the bars started installing security cameras. So police decided to review the footage of said cameras, and eventually they spotted Brian. So around 1:15 a.m. they saw Brian, Clint, and Meredith going into an escalator inside of Ugly Tuna Saloona. and they went to the main entrance or main level. And then around 1:55 in the morning, he was seen saying goodbye to two females, the two females I mentioned earlier in the video. And it looks like he was heading back to go inside of the bar. But unfortunately, the camera never caught Brian leaving out of the bar. So the investigators on this case theorize that Brian may have changed clothes, which just sounds a bit much, but in any case, they thought he may have changed clothes or put on a hat so that he could hide his face. And then they also believe that maybe the camera just happened to not catch him leaving, because there was one camera that was stationary and then there was another camera that was mobile. So there's a good chance that it may have been facing the opposite direction when Brian walked by, because it would have been continuously panning the area. So he may have timed it so that he wouldn't be caught on camera, or he just happened to walk by when it was panning in the opposite direction. So after investigators searched the entire bar, they did discover that there was another exit. However, it was mainly used for the service and it was rarely used by the general public. However, this exit led to a construction site which was behind the bar. Now, from what they stated, it would have been extremely hard to walk through this area sober. So remember, they had been bar hopping and they had hard liquor at each place they went to. So they probably had a minimum of like 5 to 7 hard shots. That's gonna catch up to you. So guys, this video was recorded in April and I'm just now editing in June. I know. So I decided to do one more sweep of the internet just to see if there was anything else that I could include in this video. And I came across a couple of blogs, social media accounts, and a lot of people were chiming in on the construction site and how it honestly was not as difficult to maneuver through as law enforcement and news outlets were making it out to be. And if that is in fact the case, because obviously that was 17 years ago, I'm sure whatever they were building is done now, so we can't really go back to verify. But if that is the case, there is a very high probability that it was extremely easy for Brian, who is young, looks like he takes care of himself and is pretty aware of himself, to maneuver through that construction site with ease, making it even more likely for him to disappear without a trace if he was in fact a willing participant. So I just wanted to throw that in there as well. Now, fun fact, Columbus has the most security cameras in Ohio. They have more than Cincinnati, Toledo, and Cleveland combined, which is wild. So investigators decided to go ahead and scrub through all of those cameras to see if there was any trace of Brian, and they still couldn't find him anywhere. It was like he literally vanished into thin air. So at this point, they're just thinking maybe this investigation would be better if we went on foot. So now they have manpower, they have dogs sniffing out areas like dumpsters, trash cans, just whatever little remote areas they can find to see if maybe there's a trace of Brian. They've got flyers, and the flyer includes a photo of Brian with a tattoo on his like right arm shoulder, and the tattoo is like an image of a stick figure from the album cover of Pearl Jam, which is his favorite band. The police department even requested for the city to allow them to search the sewers, and they couldn't find him there either. They literally tore the city of Columbus up and still couldn't find Brian. So now that the sewer has also been eliminated from the list, they made their way back to Brian's apartment, which is only 6 blocks away from the bar. His car is parked outside, and it doesn't appear that anything is missing from his vehicle. And so they make their way inside of his apartment, where they discover that nothing appeared to be missing either. So again, he played the Houdini card. No one knows where you went. Now, some people believe that Brian decided to just disappear to grieve in solitude, over the death of his mother. But again, there was no signs that he voluntarily wanted to leave. So now is a good time to mention some other things that I saw doing my final internet sweep of this case. So in a couple of areas, I saw people asking, well, why didn't the family call police sooner? Why did they wait 3 days before reporting him missing, etc., etc.? And you guys have to think, Brian is a grown ass man, okay? He recently just endured his mother passing away in the same month, all right? No more than 30 days ago. He's very close to his mom. And if they were to go to the police with that information, what do you think they would have done? They easily would have blamed it on the death of his mother and said, hey, look, he's probably really emotional right now, like a lot of people already assume, and he just needs a little time away from everybody to handle his emotions, and he'll probably turn up. But if he doesn't turn up in 24 hours, you guys can come back and we'll start a search. They already knew that. So instead of doing that, they decided to just go ahead and start the process on their own, crossing the T's, dotting their I's, and just really making sure that they put forth all the effort to find him before reporting him missing. And they knew that trip was going to determine whether he was truly missing or he just needed some time away from everyone. And when he didn't pop up for that Miami trip that he was so excited about going on, that's when they knew it was time to go to the police with what they had and to get that search started. Not in 24 hours, but right now. Now, something else that I noticed not too many people were really touching base on, which was the drinking. So, again, remember, this guy is out with his friend. He's about to go on a trip with his girlfriend. And just a few weeks ago, his mother passed away. Now, although on the outside looking in, it appears as though Brian was a-okay. He was handling his mother's death the best he could, and he was doing fine. But again, those close friends stated otherwise, that he wasn't handling it as well as he probably thought he was. And so when he goes out to drink with his friend Clint, this alcohol is starting to affect him. Because as we all know, alcohol has a way of bringing things out that people don't realize are being suppressed. Some people are happy drinkers, some people are wild, crazy drinkers, some people are sad, and some are very violent and very angry. So you just don't know what alcohol is going to do to you until you drink it and find out. And so maybe for Brian, he thought that he was doing okay with managing his emotions regarding everything going on. And then the more he was drinking, the more it was starting to hit him. And if that was the case, that also could be allegedly why this was an impromptu voluntary disappearance, because it may not have hit him until the night he was drinking. He didn't plan on disappearing, maybe, which is why his clothes and everything were still at the house, which is why his car was still there, and he just literally vanished. In that moment, he may have felt like the best thing for him was just to get away from everyone and anything that reminded him of the life that he was currently living in. Now, I do want to say that there's one more unfortunate situation that does occur later on after his disappearance. And I feel like, although that definitely was not his fault, but at that point, I feel like if he was voluntarily disappearing, he should have resurfaced by then. Because, come on, that's enough stress on everyone. But you guys will learn later what that is that I'm referring to. So now detectives are thinking they need to change their direction for the investigation. They need to start looking into the inner circle. They administer a lie detector test to Meredith, which is Clint's friend, as well as Randy, who is Brian's father, since they saw Brian the day of his disappearance. And both of them passed their tests with flying colors. Now, Clint, on the other hand, he was a bit sus, because like I told y'all earlier, he refused to take a polygraph test. Now, why would the only other person who was with Brian the longest not want to take a polygraph test? And I know y'all probably are thinking, well, what about those two females? Well, at some point in 2009, they end up getting interviewed and they never got asked to take a polygraph test, which was interesting. So the only person who they really zeroed in on was Clint, because his behavior was just very suspicious. Your best friend is missing and you were the last person really to see him alive, and you don't want to take a lie detector test? It's giving you did something or you know something. So while they are zeroing in on Clint, Alexis, the girlfriend of Brian, has been steadily, resiliently calling his phone every single day. And in September, which was 6 months or so after this happened, she stated that his phone rang 3 times, which is something that has never happened before. She was elated. However, Singular, which was the cell phone company he had at the time, explained that it could have been a glitch, and that's more than likely what happened. And so they investigated that, and it showed that Brian's phone actually pinged off of a tower that was about 14 miles away from Columbus. She was so excited that she posted about it on Facebook. So I don't know if that was really a glitch. That really could have been him or someone with his phone. What do you believe? Do you believe that it was him, or do you think it was a glitch? So police continued to receive a number of tips as time went on, but unfortunately nothing ever panned out. And at some point, Pearl Jam, the group that Brian loved and had a tattoo of their album cover on his shoulder, they actually had a concert in Cincinnati. So they got wind of Brian's case, and during a break in their segment, they had asked, for any tips on his disappearance. And unfortunately, as helpful as they were trying to be, still nothing panned out. They were trying to do something, help out a fan who could be in need. But again, nothing turned up. And they had all types of tips coming in of sightings of Brian from anywhere as local as Texas and Michigan to as far as Switzerland. But nothing checked out. So you're probably wondering, well, how is Randy handling this? What are his efforts towards finding his son? So a psychic actually reached out to Randy and informed him that Brian's body was somewhere floating in a body of water. So Randy, Brian's dad, and Derek, Brian's younger brother, as well as some other volunteers who had taken an interest in the case, decided to look in a particular river called the Olatanji River. I think that's how you say it. Sorry if I butchered it. And this river ran through Columbus and also was adjacent to OSU campus. But unfortunately, they did not find anything. So police also thought that Brian may have been a victim of the smiley face killer. But if that was the case, Brian would have been the first and only victim that would not have turned up, because all the other victims did. So eventually they subsided that theory and kind of just went back to square one. So if you thought things were bad, they get worse. So unfortunately for the Shaffer family, they would receive even more bad news. In September of 2008, there was a very heavy thunderstorm, and Randy, Brian's dad, was in his yard clearing debris when a branch broke off from a tree, flew, and hit him in the head. He unfortunately passed away, but he wasn't found until the next day. So no one knows if he was actually alive and suffering or if he died instantly. So it's unfortunate that Brian's dad passed away without knowing what happened to Brian. So they ran Randy's obituary online, and there was actually a passage that was posted, and I'm going to read that passage to you right now. So it said, "To Dad, love, Brian," in parentheses, U.S. Virgin Islands. So this suggested that Brian might have left Columbus for a new life elsewhere, and Virgin Islands would make sense because, as we learned earlier, he likes anything that has to do with the island life, Miami, the Caribbean, anything tropical, he's down for it. But then they later found out that it was a hoax, a sick joke. Why would someone do that? So shortly after the death of Randy, which again is Brian's dad, Neil Rosenberg, who is the attorney for Clint, Brian's best friend, reached out to a private investigator who volunteered his services to the Shaffer family to help find Brian. And in this letter, he addresses some things pertaining to why Clint refused to take the polygraph test. So in the letter, it states, "If Brian is alive, which is what I'm led to believe after speaking with the detective involved, then it is Brian and not Clint who is causing his family pain and hardship." And then he goes on to say, Brian should come forward and end this. And then furthermore, he says that Clint did not have anything to hide. He had merely told everything he knew from the beginning and did not see the value of doing so again. How you don't see the value of repeating yourself to help find your best friend? See, in my mind, here's what I think before I wrap up this case here. I believe that Clint knows exactly what Brian was planning. I believe Brian planned his disappearance. I believe that Clint was the only person that Brian confided in, and they did the bar hopping as like their last hoorah together. And for Brian, it was more like a reassurance that he's going to follow through with his plan, right? So that's what I think. And of course, if he took the polygraph test, he would fail. Again, that's just my theory. I don't really see why Clint would kill Brian. Like, there really wasn't much evidence that would support a reason or motive behind doing that. But a motive for not taking a polygraph test and the events that occurred the night of March 31st, 2006, yeah, it makes sense with what I said for my theory anyway. So that's what I think. What do you guys think? Do you think that there was some foul play involved? So Derek, Brian's younger brother, also had some words for Rosenberg, which is the attorney for Clint. And he stated, quote, "As soon as the detectives started getting involved, that's when he, Clint, pretty much had no contact with anybody," end quote. Then he goes on to state that, "I've always thought he definitely knows something. He just won't come forward with it." And from what Derek states is that he believes it's still possible that Brian is alive and that Clint knows where he might have gone. He goes on to say that if Brian did take off somewhere, if that is the case, we just always had a strong feeling that Clint would possibly know where he went. Now, Alexis, on the other hand, she believes that Clint killed Brian. Now, she never really goes into detail as to why she thinks that, but at least not that I found. But if y'all saw anything, let me know. But she believes that Brian is dead because she doesn't foresee him doing something so drastic as to just disappear without telling a soul. She don't believe that. She says she know her man, and her man wouldn't do that. But a lot of people feel like they know their man. And they could be further from the truth. So in 2014, Columbus Police Department stated that they were still receiving tips about Brian at least twice a month since his disappearance. But of course, every time they checked into a tip, it never panned out. So then fast forward to 2019, and there was this homeless American man spotted in Tijuana, Mexico, and people believed that he could have been the long lost Brian Shaffer. Like maybe something happened to him and he didn't remember who he was, and so someone took a picture of him and they sent it to the Columbus Police Department, who in turn sent it to FBI, and they tried to match the facial recognition points.
Nearly 14 years after Brian disappeared, this photo recently started circulating of a man, supposedly homeless and American, in Tijuana, Mexico. It said, "Help locate." Facebook groups dedicated to finding Brian swore it was him. The theories grew rampant. Brian was alive. So we brought the photo to the attention of Columbus Police and Detective Blanche Tucker.
When you first saw this, what did you think?
I was like, wow, it could be. Could it be? It's a possibility.
Because it does look a little
Like him, it does.
It was the first big break for the Brian Shaffer case. Crime Tracker 10 got unprecedented access to the files, showing the endless interviews and the leads police exhausted year after year.
We still get calls and we still receive tips.
Despite those tips and the neighborhood searches, plus pleas for information, answers never came until this photo.
It appeared that it could be Brian Shaffer, but to see if it was him, I contact, the FBI, who assists us in a lot of our cases, to see if they can do a facial recognition.
So the FBI compared the Tijuana man photo with the others they already had in a file of Brian. It took 4 weeks, but finally, Detective Tucker had her answer.
That it wasn't him.
It was not him.
Correct.
Was that a letdown?
It was. My hopes were high that it could be him.
Foul play has never been ruled out, nor has the fact that Brian maybe just took off. the stresses of life, med school, and losing a mother to cancer.
Do you feel that somebody that has been interviewed in the past maybe withheld information?
I do.
You do? But you can't say who yet.
Can't say who.
Under CPD's new cold case initiative, Detective Tucker is now reviewing every binder once again. And while this photo is now a dead end, it is, at least for her, progress in a case that continues to haunt.
It would mean closure. Not just closure for us, but closure for the family and the friends.
For Crime Tracker 10, Angela Ann, 10 TV News.
So 15 years later, in March of 2021, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation released an age-progressed photo of Brian at the age of 42 years old, with the hopes that someone out there knows something about his whereabouts. So sometime between the period in which Brian disappeared and Randy's death, Randy had actually joined a group of other families who had adult family members missing. And together, they wanted a bill passed that would elect for all police departments to have proper protocol for when situations like this occur. And the reason they wanted this bill in place was because they felt like each precinct having their own way of doing things resulted in hindering investigations. So they wanted to ensure that no other family would feel like not enough was done or more was done somewhere else than in another district. Unfortunately, it didn't pass until after Randy's death. So it is now a law, which is great. So that concludes today's story of the disappearance of Brian Shaffer, which again is still unsolved. So if y'all have any information about the disappearance of Brian, you are encouraged to contact your local police department with any information that you have. And as always, if you have an unsolved case that you would like me to talk about, please feel free to list the information in the comment section, or you can send a direct email to me and I will look into it. So with that said, friends, thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next true crime video. Bye.